They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your own blood decides you're not worth the investment? I couldn't believe the words coming out of my mother's mouth that day. I was 18, sitting at the kitchen table with college acceptance letters spread in front of me, watching my parents hand my brother a check for $210,000 while telling me, "You don't need degrees, sweetheart. Just find a good husband." The betrayal wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, surgical, like being erased from your own family portrait while you're still standing in the frame. For 32 years, I was the invisible daughter in a house that worshipped sons, the one they backstabbed with indifference disguised as tradition. But here's the secret they never saw coming. While they were busy funding my brother's lies and building their perfect family facade, I was building an empire they couldn't even imagine. And when the truth finally caught up with all of us at my brother's engagement party in front of 150 people, their carefully constructed world didn't just crack, it shattered. What happened next wasn't revenge I'd planned. It was justice I'd earned. And let me tell you, watching karma work in real time is something you never forget. I couldn't believe what I was hearing when my parents sat me down that summer afternoon. My brother Devin had just gotten his acceptance letter to medical school, and they were practically glowing with pride. Then my father slid an envelope across the table, a check for $210,000. "This covers everything Devin needs," he said, his chest puffed out like he'd just won the lottery. I was 18, sitting right there with my own college acceptance letters spread out in front of me, waiting for my turn to be seen. But my mother just patted my hand and said the words that would carve themselves into my bones. "Sweetheart, you don't need degrees. Just find a good husband." The betrayal in that moment wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, surgical, like watching someone erase you from a family photo while you're still standing in the frame. Growing up, I'd always known I was different in their eyes, but I didn't have the words for it yet. Devin got the bedroom with the big windows. I got the converted storage space. He got piano lessons and soccer camps. I got told to help Mom with dinner. Every family dinner became a stage for his achievements while my straight A's were met with distracted nods. The family drama wasn't in screaming matches. It was in the silence, in the way my father's eyes would glaze over when I spoke about my dreams. I watched them backstab me with their indifference, year after year, smile after smile. They weren't cruel people, not in the obvious way. They were just people who'd decided, somewhere deep in their programming, that sons were investments, and daughters were temporary. That night after the college money conversation, I locked myself in my tiny room and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to beg for their validation anymore. I wasn't going to shrink myself down to fit their low expectations. Revenge wasn't what I wanted. Not yet, anyway. What I craved was something deeper, self-worth that didn't depend on their approval. I applied for every scholarship I could find, my fingers cramping as I filled out form after form. The humiliation of that afternoon, watching my brother get handed his future while I was told to marry mine, that became my fuel. I'd heard stories about karma, about how the universe balances things out, but I wasn't going to wait around for cosmic justice. I was going to build my own. The next 4 years were a blur of payback in the form of relentless work. I took 3 jobs, waitressing at a diner, tutoring kids in math, and doing night shifts at a campus library. My roommates would stumble in from parties while I was stumbling out to my 5 a.m. shift, my eyes burning with exhaustion. I slept maybe 5 hours a night, lived on coffee and spite, and kept my grades flawless because mediocrity wasn't an option anymore. Devin would call home every week to update them on his classes, and I'd hear my mother's voice go soft and proud through the phone. When she'd remember to ask about me, it was always surface level. "Are you eating enough?" Never. "Are you okay?" Never. "We're proud of you." The infidelity wasn't romantic. It was familial. They'd cheated me out of the love I deserved, and I was done pretending it didn't cut deep. By my senior year, something had shifted in me. I wasn't the invisible girl anymore, at least not to myself. I graduated summa cum laude with a biology degree, got into Johns Hopkins for medical school, one of the most competitive programs in the country, and I did it all without a single dollar from them. The truth was, I'd become the person they never believed I could be. And they didn't even know it. I didn't tell them about Hopkins. Didn't send them my acceptance letter or invite them to my graduation. Why would I? They'd made it clear I was just killing time until some man decided I was worth keeping. But deep down, part of me still ached for them to notice, to wake up one day and realize they'd lied to themselves about who I was. Medical school was brutal in ways I hadn't imagined, but I'd been training for brutal my whole life. Cardiothoracic surgery became my focus, the hardest specialty, the one that required steady hands and an even steadier mind. My classmates came from families who celebrated their achievements, who called to check in during exam weeks, who understood the weight of what we were doing. I had nobody, but I also had something they didn't, a clarity about what I was worth, built brick by brick in the dark. Every surgery I observed, every skill I mastered, every compliment from an attending physician, these became my new family. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a question started forming, quiet but persistent. What would happen if they ever found out? What would their faces look like when the truth they'd ignored for so long finally came knocking? Over the next decade, I became someone I barely recognized in the mirror, in the best possible way. Dr. Brooke Hartwell, cardiothoracic surgeon. The name still felt surreal sometimes, like a coat that was too big for the girl who used to sleep 5 hours a night and cry in restaurant bathrooms between shifts. I'd completed one of the most grueling residencies in medicine, spent countless nights elbow-deep in chests, restarting hearts that had given up. My hands had learned to move with a precision that felt almost sacred. The vengeance I'd once craved had transformed into something purer. Proof. Not for them, but for me. Every life I saved was a quiet reclaiming of the dignity they'd tried to strip away when they told me my only value was in being someone's wife. The hospital became my sanctuary, the operating room my stage, and the steady beep of a successfully repaired heart my applause. But here's the thing about building a life in the shadows of your family's ignorance. Eventually, the light finds you anyway. By my early 30s, I'd kept my distance from my parents and Devon for almost a decade, showing up only for mandatory holidays with polite smiles and vague answers about my healthcare job. They never pushed for details, and I never offered them. They seemed content not knowing, probably relieved they didn't have to confront whatever mediocre reality they'd imagined for me. My mother would introduce me to relatives as Brooke, she works at a hospital, with that same dismissive tone she'd used when I was 18. Devon, meanwhile, had become the golden child on steroids. Every family gathering was a highlight reel of his accomplishments, his medical residency, his research, his upcoming engagement to a woman named Rachel who came from old money. The family betrayal wasn't active anymore. It was passive, a wound that had scarred over but never quite healed. Then came the invitation. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice dripping with that performative sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Brooke, honey, Devon's engagement party is next month at the Riverside Country Club. It's going to be quite the event. Over 150 guests. Your father and I would really love for you to be there." I could hear the unspoken script between her words. Come, but don't make waves. Be present, but not too present. Smile for the photos, but don't outshine the golden boy. I almost said no. Almost told her I had a surgery scheduled, which wasn't even a lie. I had 3 that week. But something in me, some old wound that hadn't quite finished bleeding, said yes. Maybe I wanted to see if anything had changed. Maybe I was tired of hiding. Or maybe, deep down, I knew this was going to be the moment everything shifted. The month leading up to the party felt strange, like watching a storm build on the horizon and knowing you're standing exactly where it's going to hit. I bought a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, and tried not to think too hard about what I was walking into. My colleagues at the hospital threw me confused looks when I mentioned a family event. They knew I never talked about family, never brought them up. Never had anyone visit. You sure you want to go? My mentor, Dr. Reeves asked, her eyes sharp with concern. I wasn't sure, but I was going anyway. The night before the party, I stood in my apartment looking at the one photo I'd kept from my graduation at Hopkins. Me in my white coat, alone, beaming like I'd just conquered Everest. I couldn't believe how far I'd come from that girl who'd been told she didn't need degrees. The truth was, I'd built an empire they knew nothing about. The Riverside Country Club was exactly what I expected, dripping with old money, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of people who measured worth in surnames and stock portfolios. I walked in wearing my navy dress and my grandmother's simple pearl earrings, feeling like an anthropologist studying a culture I'd once desperately wanted to belong to. My parents were holding court near the entrance, my father in his best suit, my mother glittering with jewelry I knew cost more than my first year of medical school. Devin stood beside them with Rachel, a stunning blonde who looked like she'd walked out of a catalog. They all turned when I approached, and my mother's smile was pure performance. "Oh, Brooke's here. Everyone, this is our daughter. She works in administration at a hospital." Administration. The word hit me like a slap, but I swallowed it down. This was their story, their comfortable lie. But something else caught my attention. Rachel's eyes. She was staring at me with an intensity that felt oddly familiar, her gaze lingering on my face, then dropping to my hands, then back up again. The party swirled around me like I was watching it through glass. Champagne flowed, people laughed, and my father eventually took the microphone to give a toast that made my stomach turn. "My son, Devin," he boomed, his voice full of pride that I'd never heard directed at me, "has always been destined for greatness. From the moment he was born, I knew he'd be the one to carry our family legacy forward. Tonight, we celebrate not just his engagement, but his incredible success as a physician. He's everything a father could hope for in a son, the only child who truly made us proud. The only child." I stood there, humiliated in a room full of strangers, shamed by my own father's words, and I felt something inside me crack. But before I could process it, before I could decide whether to leave or scream or disappear, Rachel set down her champagne glass. She was staring at my hands again, specifically at the silver ring on my right hand. A simple band with tiny surgical instruments etched into it, a gift I'd bought myself after my first successful solo surgery. And then her face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for the people near us to hear. "You're Dr. Hartwell." The room didn't stop immediately. Conversations kept flowing, glasses kept clinking. But in our little corner of the country club, everything froze. Rachel was staring at me like I'd just materialized out of thin air, her hand clutched to her chest, her breathing shallow. "You're Dr. Brooke Hartwell," she repeated, louder this time. And I saw my mother's confused expression, my father's irritated frown, Devin's blank stare. They had no idea what she was talking about. I nodded slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, because I knew what was coming and there was no stopping it now. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to grab my hand, the one with the ring, and held it like it was something holy. "3 years ago you saved my life," she said, her voice cracking. "I had an aortic dissection, 7 hours of surgery. You were the one who wouldn't give up on me." The memory came rushing back, a young woman coding on the table, her chest open, her heart struggling, the entire surgical team looking at me to make the call. I'd been 29, barely 2 years out of residency, and everyone in that OR thought we'd lost her. But I'd seen something, a tiny possibility, and I'd taken it. 7 hours of the most intense surgery of my career, my hands moving on instinct and training, refusing to let her die. She'd pulled through. She'd walked out of that hospital 6 weeks later, and I'd moved on to the next case, the next life, because that's what we do. I hadn't known her name was Rachel. I hadn't known she'd go on to meet my brother. Of all the operating rooms, all the cities, all the people in the world, she'd somehow ended up here, wearing his ring. The coincidence felt almost too perfect, like the universe had been waiting for exactly this moment to stop lying and start revealing. "I remember," I said softly, and Rachel let out a sob that made people turn. My mother stepped closer, her face a mask of confusion. "Brooke, what is she talking about? You're not a—" But Rachel cut her off, her voice rising with emotion and disbelief. "She's not in administration," Rachel said, turning to face my parents and Devin, her tears now mixed with something that looked like anger. "She's a cardiothoracic surgeon, one of the best in the state. She operated on me at Johns Hopkins when every other doctor said I was going to die." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet, just ticking, waiting. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then something darker, embarrassment. My mother's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Devin looked like someone had just told him the sky was actually purple. And around us, people were starting to listen, starting to turn, drawn by Rachel's emotional outburst and the tension radiating from our little family cluster. "That's impossible," my father said, his voice tight. "Brooke works in hospital administration. She never went to medical school." The betrayal of that moment, hearing him deny my entire existence, my decade of sacrifice, it should have broken me. But instead, I felt something else entirely. I felt free. Rachel wasn't done. She was on a roll now, her voice carrying across the country club's main hall, and I could see heads turning, conversations pausing. "How could you not know?" she demanded, looking at my parents like they were aliens. "How could you not know that your daughter is brilliant, that she's saved hundreds of lives, that she's achieved something most people only dream about?" My mother tried to interject, her voice shaky. "We thought she was just... We didn't realize..." But there was no good way to finish that sentence. Devin stepped forward, his face red, trying to do damage control. "Rachel, honey, I think there's been some confusion. Brooke never told us she was a doctor. She's been very private about her work." The way he said it, like I was the problem, like I was the one who'd created this mess by not bragging enough, made me want to laugh. But Rachel whirled on him, and I saw something in her eyes that looked like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "She didn't tell you because you never asked," Rachel shot back, and the truth in those words cut through every excuse, every justification my family had built over the years. "You never bothered to know her. You assumed she was less than, and she let you believe it because..." "Why? Because you made it clear she didn't matter?" The crowd around us had grown. People were openly watching now, this family implosion happening in real time at what was supposed to be an elegant engagement celebration. I stood there, silent, watching my carefully constructed invisibility shatter into a million pieces. My father tried to regain control, his voice dropping into that authoritative tone he used when he wanted to end conversations. "This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. We're here to celebrate Devin and Rachel's future." But Rachel wasn't having it. She turned to the crowd, to the 150 guests who'd come to celebrate my brother, and she made a decision that would change everything. "Excuse me, everyone," Rachel called out, her voice steady now despite the tears on her cheeks. "I need to say something." She walked toward the small stage where my father had given his toast earlier, and I saw Devin reach for her arm, panic flashing across his face. She shook him off. My mother looked like she might faint. And I just stood there, frozen, watching the woman whose heart I'd literally held in my hands 3 years ago climb onto that stage to do God knows what. The room went quiet. Every eye turned toward Rachel. She took the microphone and I couldn't believe what was happening. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't payback. This was something else entirely. This was justice served by someone who owed me nothing except, apparently, the truth. And as she opened her mouth to speak, I realized that sometimes karma doesn't wait for you to seek it out. Sometimes it shows up in a navy cocktail dress at your brother's engagement party and decides to set the whole damn thing on fire. Rachel's voice came through the microphone clear and strong, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. 3 years ago, I was 26 years old and dying. I had an aortic dissection. My heart was literally tearing itself apart. I was rushed to Johns Hopkins, and every doctor who looked at my scan said the same thing. I had maybe a 5% chance of surviving the surgery. She paused, her hand trembling slightly as she pointed at me. That woman right there, Brooke Hartwell, spent 7 hours with my chest open, repairing damage that should have killed me. She didn't give up when my heart stopped twice on the table. She didn't give up when her entire team told her to call it. She saved my life, and I didn't even know until 5 minutes ago that she was Devin's sister, the sister he barely mentions, the sister his parents just introduced as administration staff. The humiliation on my parents' faces was visible even from where I stood. People were gasping, whispering, turning to look at me with new eyes. I felt exposed in a way I'd never wanted, but also seen for the first time in my entire life. The applause started small. One person, then another, then suddenly half the room was clapping, looking at me like I'd just walked on water. My father's face had gone from red to pale. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. My mother was crying, but I couldn't tell if it was shame or shock or some mixture of both. Devin stood frozen near the stage, his golden boy smile completely shattered, replaced by something that looked like fear. Rachel wasn't finished. "I want everyone here to understand something," she continued, her voice getting stronger. "The man we're celebrating tonight, the man I agreed to marry, told me his sister worked in hospital administration. Not once did he mention she was a surgeon. Not once did he say she graduated from one of the best medical schools in the country. And his parents?" She gestured toward my mother and father. "They just stood there and let me believe their daughter was somehow less accomplished than their son. The family betrayal I'm witnessing right now is devastating, and I can't be part of a family that treats someone like this." People were openly staring now, some with sympathy, others with that hungry look people get when they smell scandal. My father finally found his voice, stepping toward the stage with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Rachel, please, you're upset, and you're making a scene. This is a private family matter that we can discuss later." But someone in the crowd cut him off. "Let her speak," a woman's voice called out, and others murmured in agreement. The power had shifted. My father, who'd controlled every narrative in our family for decades, was losing his grip in real time, and you could see the panic starting to creep into his eyes. Rachel looked at him with something close to disgust. "A private family matter? You just stood at this microphone 20 minutes ago and said Devin was your only child who made you proud. She's standing right here. Your daughter. The one who became a cardiothoracic surgeon despite you telling her she only needed to find a husband. And you erased her, in front of 150 people." The whispers grew louder. I caught fragments of conversations around me. Did he really say that? She's a heart surgeon? What kind of parents? The social currency my father had spent decades building, the reputation he'd carefully curated in this country club circle, I watched it start to crack and crumble like old paint. This was vengeance, but not the kind I'd ever imagined. I hadn't lifted a finger. I hadn't planned this. Rachel was doing it all, driven by her own sense of justice, her own moral outrage at what she'd discovered. Devin finally moved, rushing toward the stage, his voice tight and desperate. "Rachel, honey, please come down. We can talk about this privately." But she stepped back from him, and the look on her face made my stomach drop. She'd seen something. Something had shifted in her eyes, some final piece clicking into place. "Actually, Devin," she said slowly, "while we're revealing truths tonight, why don't you tell everyone here about your residency? Tell them about your research position at the hospital." The color drained from Devin's face so fast I thought he might pass out. My father's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Devin's in his residency program. He's been working—" But Rachel cut him off, her voice sharp as broken glass. "No, he's not. I found out last week when I called the hospital to coordinate our schedules. Devin isn't in residency. He hasn't been in residency for 2 years. He works in pharmaceutical sales. The bomb dropped. The room erupted. My mother actually gasped out loud, her hand flying to her mouth. My father stood there, his entire worldview shattering in real time. Because the golden child he'd invested $210,000 in, the son he'd praised to the heavens, had lied to him for years. Devin had cheated the system, coasted on their assumptions, and built a house of cards that was now collapsing in front of everyone who mattered in his social circle. And suddenly, it made sense. Why they'd never questioned the vague updates, never visited him at work, never asked for details. They'd wanted to believe so badly that they'd stopped looking. The infidelity wasn't romantic. It was worse. It was the betrayal of everything my father valued: status, achievement, the appearance of success. Devin's face went from pale to red, his hands shaking as he tried to form words that wouldn't come. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for his response, and I could see the exact moment he realized there was no way out of this. "That's not... I can explain?" he stammered. But Rachel was already shaking her head, tears streaming down her face now, not from sadness, but from rage. "You lied to me," she said, her voice breaking. "You lied to your parents. You let them think you were following in their footsteps, becoming this great physician, when really you dropped out and took a sales job. And you know what the worst part is? You looked down on your sister. You let your parents erase her, mock her, treat her like she was nothing, when she's everything you pretended to be." The truth of it hung in the air like smoke, choking everyone in its path. My father turned to Devin, his face a mask of betrayal and shock. "Is this true? Tell me she's wrong." But Devin couldn't. He just stood there, caught in his own web of lies, exposed in front of the very people he'd been trying to impress for years. My mother moved toward Devin, her maternal instinct kicking in even as her world crumbled. "Devin, sweetheart, just tell us what happened. We can fix this." But my father's voice cut through like thunder. "Fix this? He's been lying to us for 2 years. Do you know how much money we spent? Do you know how many people I've told about his residency?" And there it was. The thing that hurt my father most wasn't that Devin had lied. It was that the lie made him look foolish. His precious reputation, built on the myth of his successful son, was disintegrating in a country club ballroom while his colleagues watched. Devin finally found his voice, and it came out angry, defensive. "You want to know why I lied? Because nothing I did was ever good enough. Medical school was hell, and I hated it. But I couldn't tell you that because you'd already decided I was going to be a doctor. So yeah, I dropped out. I took a job that actually makes me happy. But I knew you'd never accept that." The family drama was reaching its peak, layers of dysfunction peeling back like an onion. Rachel stepped down from the stage, walking straight toward Devin with her engagement ring already sliding off her finger. "I could have accepted you working in sales," she said quietly, but her voice carried in the silent room. "I could have accepted you changing careers. What I can't accept is you being so ashamed of the truth that you built your entire relationship with me on lies. And what I definitely can't accept is being part of a family that would rather protect a fraud than acknowledge someone genuine." She held out the ring to him, her hand steady despite the tears. "We're done, Devin. The engagement is off." The gasps from the crowd were audible. Devin stared at the ring like it was a grenade. My mother let out a sob. And my father. My father looked like a man watching his empire burn, unable to do anything but stand there and let it happen. Rachel turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. "Dr. Hartwell, I owe you my life. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner who you really were, and I'm sorry your family couldn't see it." She walked out of the country club with her head held high, and the silence she left behind was deafening. Then the whispers started, a wave of gossip and shock that rippled through the 150 guests like wildfire. I stood there, still frozen in place, watching my family's carefully constructed facade shatter into irreparable pieces. People were staring at my parents now, at Devin, with expressions ranging from pity to judgment to barely concealed satisfaction. This was the payback I'd never asked for, the karma I'd stopped believing in. My father's friends, the men he golfed with, the couples who attended his dinner parties, they were all reassessing him now, wondering what else he'd lied about, what other truths he'd twisted to maintain his image. And Devon, the golden child who could do no wrong, stood there shamed in front of everyone who'd ever celebrated him. The vengeance wasn't mine, but I felt it anyway. Not sweet, exactly, but something close to vindication. My mother was the first to move, walking toward me with her makeup running, her hands reaching out like she wanted to touch me but wasn't sure if she was allowed. "Brooke," she whispered, her voice cracked and small. I didn't know you were. We thought you were just..." She couldn't finish the sentence because there was no good way to end it. "We thought you were just ordinary. We thought you were just waiting for a man to give you purpose. We thought you were just the daughter who didn't matter." My father stood behind her, his face still red, his pride wounded but his mouth shut for once in his life. And Devon wouldn't even look at me, his humiliation too complete, his fall from grace too public. I felt something shift inside me then, standing in that country club surrounded by the wreckage of my family's lies. This wasn't the triumphant moment I'd imagined during those sleepless nights in medical school. This was messy and painful and surprisingly hollow. But it was also necessary, because for the first time in 32 years, they were seeing me. Really seeing me. And they couldn't unsee it now, no matter how hard they tried. My mother's hands were still outstretched, trembling in the space between us, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse mixed with the dawning horror of recognition. But there was something else too, something that had been building in those eyes for years, visible only now in this moment of complete collapse. "I knew," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the lingering whispers of the crowd. "I knew you were struggling in college. I knew you were working yourself to death. I knew your father was wrong about you." The confession hit me harder than any of the night's revelations. Around us, people were starting to disperse, sensing this was about to get even more personal, but enough remained to hear her words. I'd caught her watching me sometimes back then, those brief moments when her smile would falter, when she'd start to say something and then stop herself. Now I understood what I'd been seeing. "You knew?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. She nodded, tears flowing freely now, her carefully applied makeup completely ruined. "I knew, and I didn't stand up for you. I told myself I was keeping the peace, that your father would come around eventually, that it was easier to just let him have his way. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air between us, and I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me had waited my entire life to hear those words. Part of me wanted to accept them, to let decades of hurt dissolve in the face of her admission. But another part, the part that had survived on spite and self-reliance, knew that sorry wasn't enough to erase 32 years of being invisible. "You were my mother," I said quietly, and my voice cracked on the word. "You were supposed to protect me. You watched him treat me like I was disposable. And you said nothing. You let him fund Devon's dreams while telling me mine didn't matter. And now you're sorry?" She flinched like I'd struck her, but she didn't look away. "I know sorry isn't enough. I know I failed you. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what we did to you, and I see who you became despite us. Maybe because of us. And I'm so proud of you, it hurts." The words should have felt good. They didn't. They felt complicated and messy and 30 years too late. My father finally spoke, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "Brooke, I don't know what to say." He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the public collapse of his perfect family narrative. "You have every right to hate us. What we did, what I did, was unforgivable. People were definitely watching now, this raw family reckoning more compelling than any scripted drama." I looked at him, this man who'd shaped so much of my pain. and I felt nothing. Not hatred, not love, just a vast emptiness where his opinion used to matter. "I don't hate you," I said, and I meant it. "I just don't need you anymore. I spent so long trying to earn your approval, your pride, your basic acknowledgement, and then I realized I could give all of that to myself. I could build a life where my worth wasn't determined by whether you noticed me." Devin was crying now too, silent tears running down his face, and when our eyes met, I saw genuine shame there. Not the performative kind, the real, bone-deep kind that comes from seeing yourself clearly for the first time. "I'm sorry, Brooke," Devin said, his voice raw. "Rachel was right. I looked down on you. I benefited from them ignoring you because it meant more attention for me. I told people you worked in administration because I was threatened by you. Even when I didn't know what you really did, some part of me knew you were stronger than me, better than me. And instead of celebrating that, I helped erase you." The honesty of it was startling, and I felt something in my chest loosen just slightly. This was what I'd needed. Not revenge, not public humiliation, but simple acknowledgement of the harm that had been done. "I can't give you back the years we took from you," my mother continued, stepping closer but not touching me. "I can't undo the damage, but if you're willing, and I'll understand if you're not, I'd like to try to know you now. The real you, not the version we invented to make ourselves comfortable." I looked at the three of them, my family, standing in the ruins of their own making, and I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice clear and calm, channeling the same steadiness I used in the operating room. "I'm not cutting you out of my life completely, but I'm also not going back to the way things were. If we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward, it's going to be on my terms. That means boundaries. That means respect. That means you don't get to take credit for who I've become. Because you didn't build this, I did." My father nodded slowly, accepting the terms like a man who knew he had no negotiating power. "And it means," I continued, looking specifically at my mother, "that if you see something wrong, you speak up. No more peacekeeping at my expense. No more silence." She nodded, her face crumpling with fresh tears. "I promise," she whispered. I turned to Devin. "And you need to figure out who you actually are, not who Dad wanted you to be. Because the Golden Child Act? It's over. And honestly, it was never real anyway." He nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. The crowd had thinned significantly now, most guests having left to spread the gossip or simply escape the emotional intensity. But a few remained, and I caught some of them looking at me with something like respect, maybe even admiration. I grabbed my small clutch from a nearby table, ready to leave this country club and this entire chapter of my life behind. "I'm going home," I announced to no one in particular. "You all have a lot to think about, and so do I." My mother reached out one more time. "Brooke, wait. Can we have dinner sometime? Just to talk?" I paused, considering. The old Brooke would have said no out of spite. The new Brooke, the one who'd learned that dignity meant choosing your battles and reclaiming your power meant deciding when to extend grace, took a breath. "Maybe," I said finally. "Text me next week. We'll see." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a boundary, a maybe, a door left slightly ajar. As I walked toward the exit, I heard my father's voice one last time. "Brooke." I turned back. "You really are extraordinary," he said, and for once there was no performance in it, just plain truth. I nodded once, acknowledging it not because I needed his validation, but because I finally believed it myself, and walked out into the night air, leaving behind the family that had tried to make me small and stepping into the future I'd built with my own two hands. The days following the country club disaster unfolded like dominoes I hadn't even meant to push. I went back to work Monday morning, scrubbed in for a triple bypass, and lost myself in the familiar rhythm of surgery. The one place where everything made sense and my value was never in question. But my phone kept buzzing in my locker, messages piling up like snow in a storm. Rachel had reached out first, a long text thanking me again and asking if we could meet for coffee. "I need to apologize properly," she wrote, "and maybe just talk to someone who gets it." I agreed, curious about this woman who'd blown up her own engagement to defend a stranger, or rather, the surgeon who'd saved her life. We met at a small cafe downtown, and she looked different without the country club polish. Younger, more real, with her hair in a simple ponytail and no makeup hiding the shadows under her eyes. "I called off the wedding completely," she told me over coffee that neither of us really drank. "Not just the engagement. Everything. I can't marry into a family that operates like that." I watched her twist her napkin, this woman who'd lost her future in one explosive evening, and I felt an unexpected kinship. "Are you okay?" I asked, and she laughed, a bitter, knowing sound. "Honestly, I'm relieved. I've been ignoring red flags for months, little comments Devin made about women in medicine, the way he'd dismiss my career in finance like it was a hobby. But the night of the party, when I saw how they treated you, their own daughter, I realized I was seeing my future. 20 years from now, that would have been me, erased and diminished while he took all the credit." The truth in her words resonated somewhere deep. She'd dodged a bullet, and she knew it. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I'm moving to Boston. There's a position at a firm there I've been too scared to pursue because Devin wanted to stay here. But screw that. I'm reclaiming my own path." We talked for 2 hours, and by the end, I realized I'd made a friend. Someone who understood what it meant to choose self-worth over comfort. Devin, on the other hand, was experiencing the full weight of consequences he'd spent years avoiding. My mother texted me updates I didn't ask for but read anyway. He'd moved back home temporarily. The pharmaceutical company had let him go after the public scandal affected their reputation, and he was seeing a therapist. "He's really struggling," my mother wrote, and I could hear the plea for sympathy between the lines. But I didn't feel sympathy. I felt the strange neutrality of watching someone finally face the music they'd been dancing around for decades. The golden child had fallen, not because of anything I'd done, but because lies eventually collapse under their own weight. That's just karma working the way it's supposed to work. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I just let him sit with the consequences of his choices, the same way I'd had to sit with mine when I was 18, and alone, and working 3 jobs to prove I was worth something. My father's consequences played out differently, in whispers at the country club, in canceled golf games, in the subtle social exile that happens when your carefully curated image implodes in public. The story had spread through his network like wildfire, and the narrative wasn't kind to him. "Failed his daughter while funding his son's lies" was how I heard it summarized, third hand through a colleague whose husband golfed with my father's crowd. He'd tried calling me twice, both times late at night, but I'd let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened to the messages, his voice sounded older, tired. "Brooke, I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I'd like to talk. Not to make excuses. I don't have any good ones. Just to listen. To hear about your life. The real one. Not the version I invented." The part that surprised me was that he sounded genuine, stripped of the bluster and ego that had defined him for as long as I'd known him. But genuine or not, I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready, and that was okay too. Boundaries weren't just about who you let in, they were about protecting your peace from people who'd already proven they could shatter it. My mother, true to her word, had texted the following week asking about dinner. I'd agreed to meet her, just the 2 of us, at a neutral restaurant where neither of us had history. She showed up early, nervous, clutching her purse like a shield. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." We ordered food we barely touched and talked, really talked, for the first time in my life. She told me about her own mother, who'd raised her to believe women were support systems for men, not individuals with their own dreams. She told me about the early years of her marriage when she'd wanted to go back to school, But my father had convinced her it wasn't necessary. She told me about watching me grow up and seeing herself in my determination, my refusal to shrink, and how it had terrified her because she'd already surrendered her own fight. "I'm not making excuses," she said carefully. "What I did, what I didn't do, that's on me. But I want you to know that every time I chose silence, a part of me died a little. And now I'm sitting across from a daughter I barely know, and it's the price I paid for peace that was never really peace at all." I listened to her confession, this woman who'd given birth to me but never quite known how to mother me, and I felt the complicated tangle of anger and grief and reluctant understanding. "I can't give you absolution," I told her honestly. "I can't tell you it's all okay now because you've apologized. But I can give you honesty, and here it is. I'm willing to try. Not to go back to being your daughter the way I was. That version of us is gone. But maybe we can build something new, something based on truth instead of pretense." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "That's more than I deserve," she whispered. We finished dinner making small talk about my work, and for the first time, she asked real questions about my surgeries, my colleagues, what it felt like to hold a human heart in my hands. And I answered, cautiously at first, then with growing openness as I realized she was actually listening, actually trying to see me. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but real. As we left the restaurant, she hugged me and I let her, feeling the weight of 32 years in that embrace, all the moments we'd missed and the possibility of moments yet to come. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever been the invisible one in your own family? Have you ever watched someone else get handed opportunities on a silver platter while you were told your dreams didn't matter? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. Because I know I'm not alone in this. Maybe you're the daughter who was told to be quiet while your brother got to be loud. Maybe you're the one who built something incredible just to prove you could. Or maybe you're still in the thick of it, wondering if standing up for yourself makes you selfish or strong. I want to hear it all. The messy, the painful, the triumphant. And here's the real question. Do you think I should forgive my family completely, keep them at arm's length, or cut ties altogether? What would you do in my position? Because healing isn't linear, and family trauma doesn't come with an instruction manual. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen or gave you permission to set your own boundaries, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I've got more stories like this coming, more truths that people don't want to talk about but desperately need to hear. Let's keep this conversation going, because your self-worth isn't up for negotiation, and neither is mine.